They had absolutely no idea that the black man they just called security on was the billionaire CEO who owned their entire bank. When Marcus Taylor walked into his own Premier Financial Group branch asking for a business loan, the staff took one look at his modest clothes and immediately assumed he was seeking public assistance. What happened next would shut down the entire branch in 10 minutes and spark the biggest discrimination lawsuit in banking history. The receptionist who insulted him, the loan officer who accused him of fraud, and the manager who had him escorted out by security were about to discover that they had just humiliated the man whose signature was on their paychecks. But the most shocking part isn't just the instant justice that followed. It's how one brave employee's secret evidence would transform an entire industry and prove that sometimes the universe delivers perfect revenge to those who need it most. You won't believe how this story ends, so make sure you watch until the very last second. They had absolutely no idea that the man walking through their polished glass doors would shut down their entire branch in exactly 10 minutes. Marcus Taylor adjusted his simple polo shirt and worn jeans as he stepped into the marble-floored lobby of Premier Financial Group, one of the most exclusive banking institutions in downtown Atlanta. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to be judged by the very people whose salaries he signed every month. You see, Marcus had built this empire from nothing. Starting with a single community bank 23 years ago, he'd grown Premier Financial into a powerhouse with over 200 branches across the Southeast. But success had come with a price he never anticipated. Reports have been filtering up to his executive office for months now, whispers of discriminatory practices, complaints from customers who looked like him, stories that made his blood boil. Today, he was going to see for himself just how deep the rot had spread. The receptionist, a blonde woman in her 30s with perfectly manicured nails, looked up from her computer screen. Her eyes swept over Marcus from head to toe, taking in his modest appearance with barely concealed disdain. The pause was just long enough to be insulting, just subtle enough to maintain plausible deniability. But Marcus had experienced this dance before, back when he was struggling to get his first business loan, back when doors slammed shut the moment he walked in. "Excuse me," she said with a plastic smile that never reached her eyes, "but I think you might be lost. The Public Assistance Office is 3 blocks down on Martin Luther King Boulevard. They handle that kind of assistance." The words hit like a slap, but Marcus had learned long ago to keep his composure. This was exactly what he'd come to find. He let a small smile play at the corners of his mouth, not from amusement, but from the satisfaction of having his worst fears confirmed. The woman had just sealed her fate and didn't even know it. "Actually," Marcus replied calmly, his voice carrying just enough authority to make her blink, "I'm here to speak with someone about a business loan. I have an appointment." The receptionist's expression shifted from dismissive to annoyed. She glanced at her appointment book with exaggerated reluctance, as if doing her job was somehow beneath her. "I don't see any appointments for people like you today. Perhaps you called the wrong branch? People like you." The phrase hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus felt his jaw tighten, but he maintained his calm exterior. This was bigger than just one ignorant receptionist. This was a culture, a system, a pattern of behavior that had been allowed to fester in his own company. The thought that customers had endured this treatment while his name was on the building made his chest burn with rage. "I'd like to speak with your manager," Marcus said, his tone still measured but carrying an edge that made the receptionist's eyes narrow. "The manager is very busy with important clients today," she replied, emphasizing the word important like a weapon. "But I can give you a pamphlet about our community outreach programs. They might be more suitable for your situation." Marcus nodded slowly, pulling out his phone and appearing to check messages. What he was actually doing was starting a recording app, ensuring that every word, every dismissive gesture, every microaggression would be documented. In 10 minutes, this woman would learn that the man she'd just humiliated was the same man whose vision had built every brick of this building. They had no idea who they were dealing with. None of them did. If this story already has your blood boiling, if you've ever felt the sting of being judged before you even opened your mouth, then you know exactly how Marcus felt in that moment. Hit that like button if you're ready to see justice served. Drop justice in the comments if you can't wait to see what happens next. And subscribe, because what unfolds over the next 9 minutes will restore your faith that sometimes the good guys really do win. Trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. But what that receptionist didn't know would have made her fall out of her chair in shock. The man she'd just dismissed as someone seeking public assistance was Marcus Taylor, the brilliant mind behind every policy, every procedure, and every paycheck in that building. 23 years ago, Marcus had walked into banks just like this one, facing the same prejudice, the same dismissive glances, the same crushing rejection that had just been served to him on a silver platter. The difference was, back then, he'd been powerless to fight it. Today, he owned the entire battlefield. Marcus had built Premier Financial Group from absolutely nothing. Starting with a single community bank that most investors had written off as a lost cause, he'd turned it into a financial empire worth over $2 billion. His success story had been featured on the covers of Forbes and Fortune magazine. He'd been invited to speak at economic summits alongside world leaders. Just last month, he'd been honored at the White House for his contributions to community development banking. Yet, here he stood, being treated like a second-class citizen in his own company. The tragic irony wasn't lost on him. He'd specifically chosen this modest outfit, this humble appearance, after receiving a stack of discrimination complaints that had kept him awake for weeks. Customer after customer, all sharing the same devastating story. Black entrepreneurs denied loans that white applicants with identical credit profiles received without question. Latino families steered toward predatory lending products, while white families were offered premium rates. The pattern was unmistakable, and it was happening under his name. So Marcus had made a decision that would change everything. He would go undercover, stripping away every symbol of his power and authority. No $1,000 suits, no executive assistant announcing his arrival, no security detail, no corporate entourage. Just him, dressed like any other hopeful entrepreneur, walking into his own branches to experience firsthand what his customers had been enduring. The plan was brilliant in its simplicity. He'd test the very soul of his company, the integrity of the people he'd entrusted with his vision. Would they treat every customer with the respect and dignity that Premier Financial Group claimed to stand for? Or would they reveal the ugly truth that success meant nothing if it came at the cost of basic human decency? As Marcus stood in that marble lobby, watching the receptionist's contemptuous glare, he felt a mix of heartbreak and determination that threatened to overwhelm him. This wasn't just about business anymore. This was personal. Every customer who'd been humiliated in this lobby, every dream that had been crushed by prejudice, every entrepreneur who'd walked away believing they weren't worthy of success, they were all counting on him to make this right. The receptionist was still staring at him with barely concealed disgust, clearly expecting him to slink away in defeat. She had no idea that she was looking at the man who could shut down her branch with a single phone call, who could end her career with a word, who held the power to transform not just her life but the entire culture of an institution that bore his name. But Marcus wasn't interested in petty revenge. He was after something much bigger. He was hunting for the truth, and he was about to find it in the most devastating way possible. The receptionist's attitude wasn't an isolated incident. It was a symptom of a disease that had infected his company from the inside out. And in exactly 8 minutes, that disease was about to be exposed in a way that would send shockwaves through the entire banking industry. Right at that moment, the receptionist's smug expression shifted as she realized Marcus wasn't going to simply walk away. Her perfectly practiced customer service mask slipped for just a second, revealing something much uglier underneath. She pressed a button on her desk phone with deliberate slowness, as if even this simple task was too much effort for someone like him. "Robert, there's someone here who insists he has a business loan appointment," she said into the intercom, her voice dripping with disdain. "Says he needs to speak with a loan officer about expansion funding." The response crackled through the speaker with barely concealed irritation. "Send him back to desk 3. I'll deal with it." Marcus followed the receptionist's dismissive gesture toward a cluster of desks in the back corner of the branch. The loan officer, a middle-aged white man in an expensive suit, didn't even look up from his computer screen when Marcus approached. The nameplate on his desk read, "Robert Garrison, Senior Loan Officer." This was a man who'd been with the company for over 15 years, someone Marcus had personally promoted based on his supposed commitment to customer service excellence. "Take a seat," Robert said without lifting his eyes, his fingers still clicking away at his keyboard. "What kind of loan amount are we talking about here?" "I'm looking for a business line of credit," Marcus replied calmly. $250,000 for expansion of my consulting firm." That got Robert's attention. His head snapped up, and for the first time he actually looked at Marcus. The expression that crossed his face was a mixture of disbelief and barely suppressed laughter. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms in a gesture that screamed judgment. $250,000? Robert repeated, his voice carrying the tone you'd use with a child who'd just asked for a pony. "Look, I can appreciate ambition, but let's be realistic here. You don't exactly look like someone who qualifies for that kind of money." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Here was his own employee, someone whose salary he'd approved, someone whose performance bonuses he'd signed off on, telling him he didn't look like he deserved success. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. "I have all my financial documents right here," Marcus said, reaching into his folder. 3 years of tax returns, business financials, credit reports, bank statements, everything's in order. Robert barely glanced at the papers Marcus placed on the desk. His eyes skimmed over the documents with the attention span of someone looking at junk mail. The numbers were all there, black and white proof of a successful business generating substantial revenue. But Robert's mind had already been made up the moment Marcus walked through the door. "These numbers look inflated," Robert said dismissively, pushing the papers back across the desk. "And frankly, people in your demographic tend to have challenges with loan repayment. It's just statistics, nothing personal." Nothing personal? The phrase that every victim of discrimination had heard 1,000 times, the magic words that somehow made prejudice acceptable in polite society. Marcus felt his hands clench into fists beneath the desk, but his face remained perfectly composed. "What I can offer you," Robert continued with the air of someone doing a great favor, "is a personal loan, maybe $15,000 at 22% interest. That's more appropriate for your situation." The insult was breathtaking in its audacity. A personal loan with predatory interest rates instead of the business line of credit that his financial profile clearly warranted. This wasn't just discrimination, it was financial violence wrapped in a business suit. But the nightmare was just beginning. But the humiliation was far from over. As Marcus sat there processing the shocking rejection, Robert's attitude shifted from dismissive to openly hostile. The loan officer leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that somehow managed to be both condescending and threatening at the same time. "Look, I'm going to be straight with you," Robert said, glancing around as if he was doing Marcus some kind of favor by speaking plainly. "This is Premier Financial Group. We cater to a certain clientele here. Our typical business loan customers are established professionals, people with generational wealth, connections in the community. You understand what I'm saying?" Marcus understood perfectly. What Robert was saying, without actually saying it, was that Premier Financial Group was a white institution for white people, and Marcus simply didn't belong. The code language was as old as discrimination itself, polished and refined over decades to sound reasonable while delivering the most unreasonable message possible. "I'm asking you to reconsider based on my actual qualifications," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite the rage building inside him. My credit score is 812. My business has shown consistent profit growth for 3 consecutive years. These are the metrics that should matter. Robert's laugh was sharp and cruel. Metrics can be manipulated. Anyone can cook books or inflate numbers. What matters is character, and frankly, I have concerns about your character. The accusation hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Robert had just accused Marcus of fraud without a shred of evidence, based on nothing more than his appearance and assumptions about his race. This wasn't just discrimination anymore. It was character assassination. I think it's time for you to leave, Robert said, his voice rising loud enough to attract attention from nearby customers. This conversation is over. I'd like to speak with your manager, Marcus said calmly, though his heart was pounding with fury. The manager? Robert laughed again. Trust me, she's going to tell you the same thing I just did, but if you insist on wasting more of everyone's time. Robert picked up his phone and dialed an extension. Linda, I need you at my desk. We have a situation here. Within minutes, a woman in her 50s approached the desk. Linda Morrison, the branch manager, wore a power suit that screamed authority and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Marcus recognized her immediately. She'd been promoted to branch manager just 2 years ago after what her performance reviews called exceptional leadership potential. What seems to be the problem here? Linda asked, her tone already suggesting that Marcus was the problem. This gentleman is being unreasonable about his loan application, Robert explained. He's asking for $250,000 and won't accept that he doesn't qualify. Linda's eyes swept over Marcus with the same calculating judgment he'd received from the receptionist. Sir, I understand this might be disappointing, but we have strict lending criteria. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of our community branches? They handle smaller loans for local businesses. The dismissal was complete. Not only was Marcus being rejected, but he was being directed to the community branches, code for the locations that served predominantly black neighborhoods. The message was clear. Know your place, stay in your lane, don't reach above your station. I'm questioning your reasons for this rejection, Marcus said, his voice carrying a new edge that made both Robert and Linda take notice. Our reasons are perfectly legitimate, Linda replied, her defensive tone suggesting she knew exactly how questionable their behavior was. We're simply following company policy. Company policy? Marcus repeated, and something in his tone made Linda's confident expression waver slightly. Whose company policy? Before Linda could answer, the situation took an even more degrading turn. She reached for her desk phone and pressed a button that Marcus knew would change everything. Security to the main floor, please. We have a customer who's refusing to leave. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Security. In his own building. For his own company. The humiliation was complete, but the evidence was even more complete. They had just made the most catastrophic mistake of their careers. As they waited for security to arrive, Marcus watched a scene that made his blood boil beyond anything he'd experienced so far. The glass doors opened, and a white man in his 40s walked in. He was dressed casually, khakis and a button-down shirt, nothing fancy. He approached the same receptionist who'd insulted Marcus. I'd like to speak with someone about a business loan, the man said. The receptionist's entire demeanor transformed. Gone was the dismissive attitude, replaced by genuine warmth and professionalism. Of course, sir. Right this way. Can I offer you some coffee? Water? We have some excellent pastries from the bakery next door. Marcus watched in stunned silence as the white customer was escorted to the same desk where he'd just been humiliated. Robert's attitude was completely different. Respectful, attentive, eager to help. Within minutes, they were deep in conversation about loan options, interest rates, and approval timelines. The contrast was so stark, so undeniable, that Marcus felt his hands tremble with rage. This wasn't just discrimination. It was a systematic, institutionalized practice that had been perfected over years of operation. His own employees had turned his company into everything he'd fought against his entire life. The security guard appeared at Marcus's shoulder, a young man who looked uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave the premises." Marcus looked at the guard, then at Robert and Linda, then at the white customer being treated like royalty just 20 feet away. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone, making sure the recording app was still running. Every word, every gesture, every moment of this humiliation was being documented. "I understand," Marcus said quietly. "I'll be leaving now." But as he walked toward the door, he paused and looked back at Linda. "Just one question. What's the name of the person who owns this company?" Linda's face went pale. That's Marcus Taylor. He's the founder and CEO." Marcus nodded slowly. "Interesting. You might want to remember that name. If your heart is racing right now, if you're feeling the same outrage that Marcus felt in that moment, then you understand why this story needs to be told. This isn't just about one man's experience. It's about the systematic discrimination that still exists in our society today. Hit that like button if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, no matter what they look like. Drop justice in the comments if you can't wait to see what happens when these employees discover the truth. And subscribe, because what's about to unfold in the next few minutes will restore your faith that sometimes the universe has a way of delivering perfect justice to those who need it most. No one expected what happened next would turn the entire situation on its head. As Marcus walked toward the exit, feeling the weight of every stare and whisper following him, a young woman behind the teller counter caught his eye. She was African American, probably in her mid-20s, and the expression on her face was one of barely contained anguish. While her colleagues had watched the humiliation unfold with either indifference or satisfaction, she looked genuinely distressed. As Marcus passed her station, she did something that took incredible courage. She stepped slightly away from her window, pretending to organize some papers, and whispered just loud enough for him to hear, "Sir, I'm so sorry. I've seen them do this before." Marcus stopped, turning slightly toward her. Her name tag read, Jasmine Williams, Customer Service Representative. She was young, probably fresh out of college, and the pain in her eyes told him everything he needed to know about what she'd witnessed working here. "This isn't the first time?" Marcus asked quietly, though he already knew the answer. Jasmine glanced nervously around the branch, making sure no one was watching their interaction. "I started working here 8 months ago, and I've seen this exact same scenario play out at least a dozen times. Qualified black customers, Latino customers, even some white customers who don't look wealthy enough, all getting the same treatment you just got." The confirmation hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. This wasn't an isolated incident or a bad day for a few employees. This was systematic, institutionalized discrimination that had been operating under his nose for months, maybe years. "I've been keeping records," Jasmine continued, her voice trembling slightly. "I know I could get fired for this, but I couldn't just stay silent. I have copies of loan applications that were rejected for no good reason, emails between staff members making jokes about customers, even some recorded conversations from my station phone." Marcus felt his heart racing. This young woman had been conducting her own investigation, documenting the very evidence he needed to prove that this branch was operating in direct violation of everything his company stood for. She was risking her career, her livelihood, to do what was right. "Why?" Marcus asked. "Why would you risk everything to collect this evidence?" Jasmine's eyes filled with tears. "Because my father went through the same thing 15 years ago. He had a great business plan, perfect credit, money for a down payment, but bank after bank turned him down. He never got to start his restaurant because people looked at him and saw someone who didn't deserve success. He died 5 years ago, still believing he wasn't good enough. I swore I'd never let that happen to anyone else if I could help it." The story hit Marcus with devastating force. Here was someone who understood exactly what he'd just experienced, who had watched her own father's dreams die because of the same prejudice that had just been directed at him. And she was willing to risk everything to prevent it from happening to others. "I can email you everything I've collected," Jasmine whispered urgently. "But I need to know it's going to make a difference. I need to know someone with power is going to actually do something about this." Marcus looked at this brave young woman who had no idea she was talking to the person with the ultimate power to change everything. In that moment, he made a decision that would transform not just her life, but the entire culture of his company. "Give me your email address," he said quietly. "Send me everything. I promise you, this is going to make a difference." Meanwhile, the security cameras throughout the branch had been recording everything. Every dismissive gesture from the receptionist, every discriminatory comment from Robert, every moment of Linda's hostile management, and every second of Marcus being escorted out like a criminal. The irony wasn't lost on him that his own security system was about to provide the evidence that would bring down the very people it was supposed to protect. But there was more evidence than just the cameras. Marcus's phone had been recording the entire interaction, capturing not just the words but the tone, the attitude, the complete lack of professionalism that had defined his experience. He had audio evidence of Robert's accusations of fraud, Linda's dismissive redirection to community branches, and the casual racism that had permeated every moment of his visit. As Marcus finally reached the exit, he turned back one more time to look at the branch. The white customer was still being treated like royalty, laughing and joking with Robert as if they were old friends. The contrast was so stark, so undeniable, that it would be impossible for anyone to claim this was about anything other than race. But the most damning evidence of all was yet to come. Marcus knew that within the next few minutes he would have access to something that would make this case absolutely bulletproof. The branch's own internal systems would show the pattern of discrimination, the loan approval rates broken down by race, the systematic way that qualified minority customers had been rejected, while less qualified white customers had been approved. As he walked toward his car, Marcus felt a mixture of heartbreak and determination that threatened to overwhelm him. The heartbreak was for every customer who had walked away from this branch feeling worthless, every dream that had been crushed, every entrepreneur who had given up because they believed the lie that they weren't good enough. The determination was for justice, for change, for making sure that no one would ever again experience what he had just endured. He had the evidence, he had the witnesses, he had the power to make this right. And in exactly 5 minutes, everyone in that branch was going to discover just how catastrophic their mistake had been. Right at that moment, as Marcus reached his car in the parking lot, the atmosphere inside the branch was about to shift from smug satisfaction to absolute terror. The employees had no idea that they were living through the final moments of their careers, that their casual racism and institutional discrimination was about to collide head-on with the most powerful force in their professional universe. Marcus sat in his BMW, the same car he'd deliberately parked in a distant corner of the lot to avoid drawing attention to his wealth. His hands were steady as he pulled out his phone, but his heart was pounding with a mixture of rage and anticipation. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice for every customer who had been humiliated, every dream that had been crushed, every qualified applicant who had walked away believing they weren't worthy of success. He scrolled through his contacts and found the number he needed. When the voice answered, Marcus's tone was calm, controlled, and absolutely deadly. "This is Marcus Taylor. I need you to implement Protocol 7 on Branch 117, effective immediately." The voice on the other end was his Chief Operating Officer, Sarah Chen, a woman who had helped him build Premier Financial Group from a single branch into a multi-billion-dollar empire. She knew exactly what Protocol 7 meant, and her sharp intake of breath told him she understood the gravity of the situation. "Marcus, are you certain? Protocol 7 is nuclear. Once we trigger it, there's no going back. I'm standing in the parking lot of branch 117 right now, Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I just spent the last 10 minutes being discriminated against, humiliated, and escorted out by security in my own building. Yes, Sarah, I'm certain. Consider it done. Legal team is already mobilizing. HR will be there within the hour. The branch will be locked down pending investigation. Marcus ended the call and immediately dialed another number. This time it was his head of corporate communications, a man whose job it was to manage the public image of Premier Financial Group. David, I need you to prepare a statement. In about 5 minutes, I'm going to walk back into branch 117 and reveal my identity to the staff who just discriminated against me. I want cameras. I want documentation, and I want this story to go viral for all the right reasons. The third call was to his personal attorney, a woman who had handled some of the biggest discrimination cases in the Southeast. Maria, I need you to prepare a lawsuit. Multiple defendants, institutional discrimination, violation of federal lending laws. I have video evidence, audio recordings, and witness testimony. This is going to be the case that changes everything. As Marcus made his calls, something extraordinary was happening inside the branch. Jasmine Williams, the young teller who had shown such courage, was at her computer terminal sending an email that would change her life forever. She was attaching months of documented evidence, screenshots of discriminatory emails, recorded conversations, and patterns of loan rejections that painted a clear picture of systematic bias. But she had no idea that the email she was sending was going directly to the personal account of the man who owned the company, the man who had just been humiliated at the hands of her colleagues. She thought she was reaching out to just another customer who might have connections, someone who might be able to help. She had no idea she was about to become a hero in the most important civil rights case the banking industry had seen in decades. Marcus finished his calls and sat for a moment, gathering his thoughts. In less than 3 minutes, he was going to walk back into that branch and deliver the most devastating revelation in the history of Premier Financial Group. He was going to watch the faces of people who had treated him like dirt realize that they had just destroyed their own careers in the most spectacular way possible. But this wasn't just about watching them squirm. This was about sending a message that would reverberate through every branch, every department, every level of his organization. This was about making it clear that discrimination would not be tolerated, that every customer deserved to be treated with dignity and respect, and that anyone who violated those principles would face consequences that would end their careers. Marcus checked his watch. It had been exactly 10 minutes since he'd been escorted out of the building. 10 minutes since Robert had accused him of fraud. 10 minutes since Linda had told him to go to a community branch. 10 minutes since they had made the most catastrophic mistake of their professional lives. He stepped out of his car and began walking back toward the building. With each step, his resolve grew stronger. This wasn't just Marcus Taylor, the humiliated customer, walking back into that branch. This was Marcus Taylor, the founder, the CEO, the man whose vision had built every brick of that building, whose policies had created every job, whose signature was on every paycheck. As he approached the glass doors, Marcus could see the staff inside going about their business, completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit them. Robert was still chatting with the white customer, probably celebrating another successful discrimination. Linda was back at her desk, probably writing up a report about the difficult customer she'd had to have removed. The receptionist was back to her computer, probably gossiping about the inappropriate man who had dared to ask for a loan. None of them saw him coming. None of them realized that their world was about to implode in the most spectacular way possible. None of them understood that they were about to become the face of everything that was wrong with institutional racism in America. Marcus pushed open the glass doors and stepped back into the branch. The moment his feet hit the marble floor, everything changed. The air itself seemed to shift, charged with the electricity of impending justice. It was time for the reveal that would change everything. But what happened next would go down in corporate history as the most devastating moment of reckoning ever witnessed in the banking industry. Marcus walked through those glass doors with the quiet confidence of a man who owned everything around him, and the first person to notice his return was the same receptionist who had insulted him just minutes earlier. Her face went through a series of expressions that would have been comical if the situation weren't so serious. First confusion, then annoyance, then genuine fear, as she realized that the man she'd dismissed was back, and something about his demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the humble customer seeking help. In his place stood someone who radiated the kind of authority that made people instinctively step back. "Excuse me," she stammered, "but I thought you were asked to leave." Marcus didn't respond to her. Instead, he walked directly to the center of the branch lobby, positioning himself where everyone could see him. The conversations around the branch gradually died down as customers and staff alike sensed that something significant was about to happen. Robert looked up from his desk, his face flushing with irritation. "Sir, I'm going to have to call security again if you don't leave immediately." "That won't be necessary," Marcus replied, his voice carrying across the entire branch with crystal clarity. "In fact, I think you'll find that security works for me." The confusion was palpable. Linda emerged from her office, her expression shifting from annoyance to concern as she noticed the attention Marcus was commanding. Other customers had stopped their transactions to watch, sensing that they were about to witness something extraordinary. Marcus reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a leather portfolio. From it, he extracted a single document and held it up for everyone to see. "This is a temporary closure order for Branch 117 of Premier Financial Group, effective immediately, pending investigation into discriminatory lending practices." The words hit the room like a physical shockwave. Robert's face went pale, and Linda took an involuntary step backward. The white customer who had been treated like royalty just minutes earlier looked around in confusion, suddenly realizing he was witnessing something historic. "You can't possibly have the authority to Linda began, but Marcus cut her off with a look that made her words die in her throat. "I'm the man whose name is on your paycheck," Marcus said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute power. "I'm the man whose signature is on every policy you violated today. I'm the man whose company you've just turned into everything I spent my life fighting against." The revelation hit the room like a tsunami. The receptionist's hand flew to her mouth in horror. Robert's face went from pale to ashen gray. Linda looked like she was about to faint. Other staff members who had witnessed the earlier discrimination began to realize the magnitude of what they had just been part of. "My name is Marcus Taylor," he continued, his voice now carrying to every corner of the branch. "I am the founder and CEO of Premier Financial Group. 23 years ago, I built this company on the principle that every customer deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, regardless of what they look like or where they come from." The silence in the branch was deafening. Customers were pulling out their phones, realizing they were witnessing a moment that would be talked about for years to come. The white customer who had been approved for his loan looked mortified, suddenly understanding the contrast between his treatment and what he had witnessed happening to Marcus. Marcus walked directly to Robert's desk, where the loan officer was now shaking visibly. "You accused me of fraud, Mr. Garrison. You said people in my demographic have challenges with loan repayment. You offered me a predatory personal loan instead of the business credit I qualified for. Would you like to explain to me why my own company's loan officer thinks I'm not worthy of basic respect?" Robert's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. No words came out. The man who had been so confident in his discrimination just minutes earlier now looked like he was about to collapse. Marcus turned to Linda, who was standing frozen behind her desk. "And you, Miss Morrison? You told me I'd be more comfortable at a community branch. You had me escorted out by security for asking questions about your decision-making process. You represent my company to the public, and this is how you choose to represent it." Linda's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Mr. Taylor, I didn't know." "I'm so sorry." "You're sorry you got caught," Marcus replied, his voice carrying the weight of absolute judgment. "You're sorry that your victim turned out to be someone with the power to hold you accountable, but you're not sorry for what you did. You're not sorry for the customers you've humiliated. You're not sorry for the dreams you've crushed." At that moment, the branch doors opened and a team of corporate investigators walked in, followed by HR representatives carrying official documentation. The sight of them sent a wave of panic through the staff who had participated in the discrimination. "These investigators will be conducting interviews with every employee in this branch," Marcus announced. "They'll be reviewing security footage, examining loan approval patterns, and documenting every instance of discriminatory behavior. Those found responsible will face immediate termination and potential legal action." The lead investigator, a stern woman in her 50s, approached Marcus with a formal document. "Mr. Taylor, the branch lockdown is now in effect. All lending activities are suspended pending the completion of our investigation." Marcus nodded and turned back to the staff. "You had the power to make this right. You could have treated every customer with the respect they deserved. Instead, you chose to make my company complicit in the very discrimination I spent my life fighting against." The room was so quiet you could hear a pin drop. The magnitude of what had just happened was sinking in for everyone present. This wasn't just about a few employees losing their jobs. This was about a moment of reckoning that would transform how the entire industry thought about discrimination and accountability. Marcus's phone buzzed with a text from his communications director. "Statement is ready. Legal team is preparing the lawsuit. This is going to change everything." But what nobody expected was that this moment of justice would spark a transformation that would ripple through the entire banking industry for decades to come. As the corporate investigators began their work and the discriminatory staff faced the consequences of their actions, Marcus turned his attention to the one person in the branch who had shown true courage and integrity. Jasmine Williams stood at her teller station, tears streaming down her face as she watched justice unfold before her eyes. She had risked everything to document the discrimination she witnessed, never knowing that her brave actions would reach the very person who could make the most difference. When Marcus approached her station, she looked up with a mixture of fear and hope that broke his heart. "Miss Williams," Marcus said gently, "I received your email with the evidence you've been collecting. What you did took incredible courage, and I want you to know that your documentation will be crucial in making sure this never happens again." Jasmine's voice trembled as she spoke. "I just couldn't stand by and watch anymore. My father would have been so proud to see what happened here today. He always said that sometimes one person standing up for what's right can change everything." "Your father was right," Marcus replied, his voice filled with genuine emotion. "And because of your courage, I'm promoting you to be the founding member of our new Equity Oversight Committee. Your job will be to ensure that every customer in every branch receives the respect and dignity they deserve." The transformation didn't stop there. Within 24 hours, Marcus had implemented the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in banking history. The centerpiece was an advanced AI system called the Bias Detection Protocol, which would monitor every loan application, every customer interaction, and every decision made across all Premier Financial Group branches. "This AI system will analyze patterns in real time," Marcus explained to the gathered media the next day. "It will flag any discrepancies in loan approval rates, identify potential discriminatory language in customer interactions, and ensure that every financial decision is based solely on qualifications and merit." The lawsuit that followed became a landmark case in corporate accountability. Robert Garrison, Linda Morrison, and the discriminatory receptionist were not only fired but faced personal liability for their actions. The case sent shockwaves through the banking industry, establishing new precedents for how discrimination would be prosecuted and punished. But the most powerful transformation was cultural. Marcus's public statement, which went viral within hours of being released, became a rallying cry for justice in corporate America. No one will be treated like a second-class citizen at my company. We will not simply fire those who discriminate. We will ensure they face consequences that prevent them from inflicting this pain on others elsewhere. The ripple effects were immediate and far-reaching. Other major financial institutions began implementing similar oversight programs. Business schools started teaching Marcus's response as a case study in ethical leadership. Most importantly, customers who had been discriminated against began coming forward, sharing their stories and finding the courage to demand better treatment. Jasmine Williams became the face of the new Premier Financial Group, leading training sessions across the country and speaking at conferences about the importance of standing up for what's right. Her father's restaurant dream, which had been crushed by discrimination decades earlier, was finally realized when Marcus personally approved a business loan for her to open a restaurant in her father's memory. The former Branch 117 was transformed into the Premier Financial Group Center for Equity and Inclusion, a training facility where employees from across the industry came to learn about unconscious bias, cultural sensitivity, and the business case for treating every customer with respect. 6 months later, as Marcus stood in the newly renovated center, he reflected on how a single moment of discrimination had become a catalyst for industry-wide change. The irony wasn't lost on him that the employees who had tried to deny him a loan had inadvertently sparked a revolution in corporate accountability. The most dangerous thing about discrimination, Marcus said in his closing remarks at the center's opening ceremony, is that it makes people believe they're not worthy of success. But the most powerful thing about justice is that it reminds everyone that worthiness isn't determined by the color of your skin or the assumptions others make about you. The white customer who had witnessed the original discrimination became an ally and advocate, using his experience to educate others about the privileges he had taken for granted. His testimony in the lawsuit was crucial in establishing the pattern of differential treatment that had defined the branch's operations. As for the discriminatory employees, their careers in banking were effectively over, but Marcus had also implemented a rehabilitation program for those willing to acknowledge their mistakes and commit to genuine change. Some took advantage of this opportunity, becoming advocates for equality in their new careers. Others remained bitter and defensive, serving as cautionary tales about the consequences of clinging to prejudice. The story of Marcus Taylor and Branch 117 became more than just a viral moment. It became a blueprint for how leaders could use their power to create meaningful change. Business leaders across the country began conducting their own undercover assessments, discovering uncomfortable truths about their organizations and taking action to address them. But perhaps the most powerful legacy was the message it sent to every person who had ever been discriminated against, every dreamer who had been told they weren't good enough, every entrepreneur who had been judged by their appearance rather than their qualifications. The message was simple but revolutionary. Your worth is not determined by other people's prejudices, and sometimes the universe has a way of delivering perfect justice to those who need it most. As Marcus often said in the years that followed, sometimes it takes the boss showing up in plain clothes to reveal what's really behind the suit. And sometimes what's behind the suit is exactly what needs to be changed. The transformation was complete, but the legacy would last forever. What Marcus Taylor experienced that day wasn't just personal humiliation. It was a mirror reflecting the painful reality that millions of people face every single day in boardrooms, banks, and businesses across America. The difference was that Marcus had the power to fight back, to turn his pain into purpose, and to transform a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. But here's the truth that hits deepest. For every Marcus Taylor who can reveal his identity and demand justice, there are countless others who walk away believing the lie that they're not good enough, that their dreams don't matter, that their worthiness is determined by someone else's prejudice. The real tragedy isn't what happened to a billionaire CEO, it's what happens to everyone else who doesn't have a corporate empire to shut down in response. This story teaches us that change doesn't happen by accident. It happens when people like Jasmine Williams risk everything to document the truth, when leaders like Marcus use their power to protect others instead of just themselves, And when ordinary people refuse to accept that discrimination is just the way things are, the most powerful weapon against prejudice isn't anger or revenge. It's the courage to demand better and the determination to make sure that what happened to you never happens to anyone else. Marcus could have simply fired those employees and moved on. Instead, he chose transformation over punishment, education over elimination, and healing over hatred. He understood that real change requires more than just consequences. It requires creating systems that prevent the problem from happening again. The lesson here isn't just about corporate responsibility or social justice. It's about the power each of us has to be either part of the problem or part of the solution. Every time we witness discrimination and stay silent, we become complicit. Every time we stand up for what's right, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it's risky, we become part of the change. So the next time you see someone being treated unfairly, remember Marcus Taylor and Jasmine Williams. Remember that sometimes the person being discriminated against might be the one person who can change everything. But more importantly, remember that even if they can't fight back, you can still choose to be their ally, their witness, their voice when they can't find their own. If this story opened your eyes to the reality of discrimination that still exists in our world, hit that like button to show your support for justice and equality. Drop a comment telling us about a time you witnessed discrimination or stood up for someone who needed an ally. Your story might inspire someone else to find their courage. And if you believe in the power of stories to change hearts and minds, subscribe to our channel, because we're committed to bringing you more content that doesn't just entertain, but educates, inspires, and empowers you to make a difference in your own world. Remember, justice isn't just about what happens to the powerful, it's about what we do for those who have no power at all.